Ladies and gentlemen, there is a powerful lesson buried inside history, and it has nothing to do with weapons, tanks, or planes. It has everything to do with perception. Because the greatest mistakes are not made when we lack strength, but when we misunderstand reality. And one of the most costly miscalculations of the 20th century was born not on a battlefield, but in the mind. Japan did not fail because it lacked courage. Japan did not fail because it lacked discipline. Japan failed because it misunderstood the soul of the nation it chose to fight. They looked at America and saw comfort. They saw abundance and assumed weakness. They saw debate and assumed division. They saw freedom and assumed disorder. But what they failed to see was resilience. You see, when you judge a people by the surface, you miss the fire underneath. When you measure a society by its comfort, you overlook the strength it took to build that comfort. And when you mistake openness for fragility, you are setting yourself up for a devastating surprise. Japan's leaders believed they understood America. They studied its movies, its newspapers, its consumer culture. They saw people laughing, arguing, living freely, and from that they drew a conclusion. These people will not fight hard. These people will not endure suffering. These people will break when the pressure comes. That assumption was not just wrong, it was fatal. Because America was not built by people who avoided hardship, it was built by people who survived it. A nation formed by immigrants who crossed oceans with nothing but hope. A nation shaped by pioneers who pushed through wilderness, famine, and isolation. A nation tested by civil war, economic collapse, and social upheaval. Comfort was not America's weakness. Comfort was America's reward. And here is where the misunderstanding ran deep. The Japanese leadership believed America understood division. They believed strength only came from uniformity. They believed unity required silence. But America's strength came from something else entirely. It came from diversity. It came from disagreement. It came from millions of individuals who, when threatened, discovered a shared purpose. You see, when America argues, it argues loudly. When it debates openly. And to an outside observer, that can look like chaos. But when America commits, it commits completely. The attack did not divide the nation, it unified it. Political rivals stood side by side. Factories shifted overnight. Workers doubled shifts. Families sacrificed sons and daughters without hesitation. Because when the American identity is challenged, something extraordinary happens. Differences fade, priorities sharpen, and a sleeping giant wakes up. Japan believed Americans fought for comfort. They did not understand that Americans fight for belief. Belief in opportunity, belief in self-determination, belief that no external force has the right to dictate their future. That belief runs deeper than fear, deeper than loss, deeper than fatigue. Another misjudgment was psychological endurance. Japanese planners assumed Americans would not tolerate casualties. They believed grief would weaken resolve. They believed public opinion would crumble under pressure. But grief did not weaken America, it hardened it. Loss did not lead to retreat, it led to resolve. Mothers went back to factory floors. Young men lined up to enlist. Entire communities reorganized their lives around the war effort. What Japan failed to understand was that American resilience does not come from stoicism, it comes from purpose. When people believe their struggle has meaning, they endure far more than those who fight only out of obligation. Japan also misunderstood American work ethic. They saw industrial workers as civilians disconnected from war. They believed soldiers existed only on the battlefield. They didn't understand that in America, the factory was a battlefield. Every rivet mattered. Every shift mattered. Every shipment mattered. The American worker did not see themselves as separate from the soldier. They saw themselves as part of the same mission. And when millions of people align toward a single goal, production becomes unstoppable. Japan prepared for valor. America prepared for volume. And volume wins wars. But let's go even deeper. The greatest misunderstanding was cultural pride. Japan believed their values were superior, and superiority breeds blindness. When you believe your way is the only strong way, you stop learning. When you underestimate your opponent, you stop adapting. Japan assumed honor because they valued life. They assumed fear because Americans avoided unnecessary sacrifice. They assumed softness because Americans did not glorify death. But valuing life is not weakness. Protecting the future is not cowardice. And choosing survival over spectacle is not fear. It is strategy. America did not rush blindly. It measured, adapted, and evolved. Each loss became a lesson. Each failure became a blueprint for improvement. That is something Japan never fully accounted for. America's ability to learn faster than its enemies. Mistakes were not hidden, they were analyzed. Problems were not denied, they were solved. Losses were not accepted as fate, they were corrected. This culture of constant adjustment gave America a compounding advantage, and over time, that advantage became overwhelming. Ladies and gentlemen, history teaches us something vital here. Never confuse silence with weakness. Never confuse comfort with fragility. Never confuse freedom with disorder. The greatest dangers come from misunderstanding people who do not think like you. Japan did not lose because America was perfect. America was not perfect. America was messy, loud, inefficient at times. But America was relentless. And relentlessness, fueled by belief, will always outlast rigid certainty. This lesson does not belong only to history. It belongs to us. Because every failure begins with a misunderstanding, every downfall starts with an assumption, and every misjudgment carries a price. When you underestimate someone because they live differently than you blind yourself. When you dismiss someone because they struggle openly, you weaken yourself. When you assume strength must look a certain way, you limit your vision. Do not judge the storm by the calm before it. Do not judge the fighter by their smile. Do not judge the nation or the individual by the surface, because what you don't understand can defeat you. Japan misjudged America, not because America hid its strength, but because Japan refused to see it. And that is the ultimate lesson. The world does not punish weakness, it punishes arrogance. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we reach the end of this reflection, what remains is not just a historical conclusion, but a human one. The story of how Japan misjudged America in World War II is not merely about nations and armies. It is about the danger of assumptions and the cost of arrogance. It is about what happens when confidence turns into blindness, when pride replaces curiosity, and when belief in one's own superiority shuts the door to understanding others. Japan entered the war convinced that it knew its enemy. That certainty became its greatest weakness, because the moment you believe you fully understand someone, you stop listening, you stop observing, you stop learning. And when learning stops, decline begins. America was not invincible. It was flawed, divided, imperfect, but it possessed something far more powerful than perfection, the ability to adapt. It could absorb shock, learn from failure, and transform pain into progress. That is a lesson that echoes far beyond the battlefields of World War II. History shows us again and again that strength does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it looks disorganized. Sometimes it looks comfortable. Sometimes it looks slow. But when pressure is applied, true strength reveals itself, not in words, but in endurance. Japan believed the war would be decided quickly. America believed it would be decided correctly. And in that difference lies the outcome. One side sought a moment of dominance. The other prepared for a test of time. And time always favors those who can endure, evolve, and persist. This conclusion is not about assigning blame. It is about extracting wisdom. Because the same mistake that altered the course of history can quietly repeat itself in our lives, our careers, our ambitions, and our judgments of others. How often do we underestimate people because they don't look strong the way we expect strength to look? How often do we dismiss ideas because they arrive wrapped in imperfection? How often do we confuse loud confidence with real capability? The tragedy of misjudgment is that it rarely announces itself as a mistake. It feels like certainty. It feels like clarity. It feels like being right, until reality proves otherwise. Japan's leaders were not ignorant. They were educated, experienced, disciplined. But intelligence without humility becomes dangerous. Knowledge without openness becomes rigid. And confidence without curiosity becomes fatal. America's greatest weapon was not steel or oil or factories. It was belief. Belief in improvement. Belief in unity under threat. Belief that tomorrow could be better if today was endured. That belief transformed grief into resolve, fear into focus, and loss into momentum. And here is the final truth. History rewards those who respect complexity. It punishes those who oversimplify the world. Nations fall. Organizations fail. Individuals collapse. Not because they are weak, but because they misread the forces around them. They assume instead of analyze. They judge instead of understand. They cling to pride instead of adapting. The lesson of this misjudgment is timeless. Do not underestimate resilience. Do not mistake silence for surrender. Do not confuse freedom with fragility, and never assume that comfort means incapacity. The strongest people are often those who have learned to live fully, argue openly, fail publicly, and rise repeatedly. Strength is not the absence of struggle. Strength is the ability to transform struggle into power. Japan misjudged America because it measured strength using its own definitions, and the world does not operate on a single definition of strength. The world rewards those who can recognize power, even when it wears an unfamiliar face. As we move forward, let this history remind us to stay humble, stay observant, and stay open, because the greatest enemy is not the opponent we see, it is the misunderstanding we carry. And in the end, the most important battles are not fought with weapons, but with wisdom. Thank you.